Appreciate you streaming in here on Birds 365 with Mac and Mac. We are joined by an esteemed guest, a guy who's got almost 2 decades worth of NFL experience as an exec and a scout. Blake Beddingfield from BeddingfieldSports.com. Good enough to jump in with us here on Birds 365. Blake, how's your off season going?
It's going great. I mean, it's really not an off season anymore.
Yeah,
it's
no, never.
Football is 12 months a year, no doubt about it. And what better way to wake up in the morning than talk a little draft?
There we go. So I want to ask you, we were talking before you came on, Blake, and your 19 years as director of college scouting with the Titans. Did you guys ever, once in those 19 years, talk about anybody's mock draft other than maybe making fun of it?
You know, when you get into those last 2 weeks before the draft, you're in meetings all day long. So you start to talk about other things than just players on the board. So you'll talk about mock drafts. You'll talk about what you're hearing from other people. But certain mock drafts, I think you pay more attention to than others. And, you know, let's just say a Daniel Jeremiah, who was in the NFL for a while, has ties to certain people in the front offices with different teams, definitely the Chargers because he's on the broadcast there. You're going to pay attention to what he's saying about the Chargers and maybe some other teams that he has, and we know he has connections to. But, you know, going to break, you were talking about Mel Kiper. Mel Kiper works out of Baltimore. He's got very close ties to the Baltimore Ravens organization. I'll listen to him about that organization. Other ones, not so much.
Understood. So now we need actual scouting, not somebody's mock draft from a guy who was in the league for as long as you were. We're going quarterback first. And I know this is an Eagles-based show, and Eagles aren't taking a quarterback until maybe the earliest day 3. But they're still the most intriguing position to talk. People say this all the time, guys who are both guys who do mock drafts and scouts like yourself. A grade 1 draft, that you have X amount of grade 1 drafts, and it's not 31 this year because there's a pick that was lost by Miami because they tamper with somebody. It isn't a guarantee that the number of first-round grades has to match up with the number of first-round picks every year. Sometimes there's more, most times there's less. How many first-round grades do you have on quarterbacks who are eligible for draft this year?
You know, I have 2 first-round grades. And the reason I say that is when you're taking a quarterback in the first round, you're getting a starter, sure. But what are you getting? Are you getting a franchise-type quarterback, someone that can lead your team without the necessary personnel around them on offense? That's what I consider a franchise quarterback. And I think Bryce Young is one of those quarterbacks. And I think C.J. Stroud is on the cusp of that. Still a first-rounder, should be a top 12 quarterback in the league, which gets you into the playoffs. Will Levis, Anthony Richardson, Tanner McKee, those are a little bit further back for me. There's development in place when you're talking about a Will Levis or an Anthony Richardson. Tanner McKee is probably more developed than those two, but less upside. When I talk about development, and we did this in rooms where we were scouting quarterbacks with coaches and that, we always say needs development. Okay, that's great. Do you have the people in place to develop him? Just because they're a coach and they have a title of quarterback coach, offense coordinator, doesn't mean they're great developers of talent. Yeah. You need to have that on staff if you're going to have success with those 2 players. They have great athleticism, size, arm strength, a lot of tools, but they haven't developed to the point to be outstanding NFL quarterbacks yet. Do you have those people on staff? That's an important piece of the puzzle.
Yeah. How difficult is it for organizations to be honest with themselves? Because we had Andy Reid here in Philadelphia for so long, and I think about 99, and I say, well, what if one of those other quarterbacks got with Andy Reid and Donovan McNabb had to go somewhere else? I think the whole thing might flip just from the situation. And we saw it with Patrick Mahomes as well with Andy, but does that work the same way? Well, he's going to be a great player, but maybe not that great.
No question about it. I think it's very important to be honest with yourself in those rooms. And part of my job as director of scouting was to have some uncomfortable conversations sometimes. When we're talking, we had an offensive line coach in Tennessee, Mike Munchak, great developer of offensive linemen. Jim Washburn, who you had in Philadelphia as a D lineman, terrific developer of D-line talent. We knew we could take players in the latter portions of the draft and they would develop them into starters. not necessarily at every position that we had. We were just lucky at those two really important line positions. But what you're saying with Andy Reid, he's developed quarterbacks over his time. He has a history of it. He has that ability to do that. Not every coach has that. Some guys are better schemers, X's and O's type guys. Some guys are the complete package and can do both.
All right, so let's get past the top two, who you like Young a little better than Stroud. I like Stroud a little bit better than Young. We'll see how that plays out. And, a lot will have to do with where each individual lands in a team that they're on and how they are developed. But go past Levis and Robinson. Is there a guy that you specifically like that's day 3 at the absolute earliest and maybe even later in day 3, who's a true developmental guy? There's no way you're asking him to come in and play year 1, but if he's there for 2 years and you get your hands on him and you build him up, you could eventually have a starter someday. Is there a specific guy that, for varying reasons, could be not thought about till day 3 that you go, yeah, if this guy lands in the right spot, he can actually become a pretty damn good starter in this league?
I say pretty good starter. I don't think there's a top 15 quarterback later in the draft. So when I'm talking about, is there a potential starter? Yeah, there's a potential starter. We see starters every year that are the back 10 in the NFL that aren't going to take a team to the playoff, and they can be considered a starting type quarterback. Mm-hmm. I think Aiden O'Connell is one of those quarterbacks that has a developmental upside. Probably he's going to sit for a year, and he's got a skill set that plays in this league. I still like Stetson Bennett. I know he's small. He's a winner. He's a distributor of the ball. Do not put him on a team that doesn't have offensive talent. Put him on a team as a backup with offensive talent around him, and he can distribute the ball. That's what he does. He's a little bit older, more mature, that type of thing. Has won a lot of ball games. I think he's a backup level quarterback that will start at some point in his career, but you're talking about a bottom 10 quarterback in the league.
We haven't mentioned Hendon Hooker, Tennessee guy. A little bit older. I think that hurts him from certainly with a lot of teams had the injury issues as well, but I've heard a lot of people say, he might sneak in the back end of the first round.
I think when teams are looking for starters, you're looking at a 25-year-old quarterback, mature, played a lot of college football, had a lot of success this year before his ACL injury, has some athleticism, has the ability to distribute the ball downfield vertically, makes the short passes very well. He can step into a team. It's what are you looking for with that player? They had a nice group of receivers around him this year at Tennessee, and he did a good job of getting the ball to him. Can he be a starting quarterback in the NFL? Without question. Is he going to be an upper-level quarterback, a playoff level? I don't see that in his play. I have him right behind Tanner McKee, but not too far behind. He's right there. Can be a starter in the league, and if a team's looking for that player, he's more apt to come in, if healthy, which he may not be healthy, right, to play year 1 than some of these other quarterbacks, like a Will Levis or an Anthony Richardson.
All right, Blake, want to go to a name who has been played up a lot here in Philadelphia, and that's Bijan Robinson. He came in for a visit for the Eagles. We know he's going to be drafted in the first round. The Eagles haven't taken a running back in the first round since Keith Byers, going way back to the 80s. So it's been a long time. So everyone's, are they having to take a running back? How special is this kid? Compare him to someone else who's come out in the last 5 years, 10 years, 15 years. The level of talent that he is, almost universally, everybody has him as the number 1 ranked back in the draft. How high should he go? How high will he go?
I think he's a top 5 player in this draft as a talent. And when you're talking about where Philadelphia is picking, you're creating value with that player, okay? You're not only creating value now, but you're creating value in that 5th-year option potential. When you start selecting in that top 10 range, you've got to create the value. If you're taking a safety or if you're taking a player where you got to overpay them in that 5th-year option, you're not really going to get value in that last year. So that's one piece of it. Bijan as a player is a 3-down player. He has outstanding contact balance. When I look at running backs now, speed, vision, sure. What's your balance on contact? Can you maintain your run gait? Can you maintain your run style? Can you get yards after contact? Because you're going to see it in the league very early. I don't care what offensive line you have. And you got to be able to run through tackles. He can do that. He also can be a receiver out of the backfield. and he's pretty adept at pass protection, which is something you want to see in the Eagles offense with the outstanding receivers that they have. So he, value-wise, would fit high in the draft. Running backs, you think you can get them later in the draft sometimes, maybe get a little bit similar skill set than he has. I like Bijan a little bit like Nick Chubb. And I think he's going to be a very good player in the league, and he's going to be a very productive player. You put him on an offense like the Philadelphia Eagles that have a lot of pieces in place and an outstanding offensive line, he could have a very good rookie year and really help out Jalen Hurts as he continues to develop and progress.
I mean, I to further sort of expound on that, the positional value as a whole, and you just talked about, Mike and Jim Washburn down in Tennessee. The Eagles are honest. I mean, Howie Roseman, for people that listen to him, is honest. It starts offensive, defensive line. He's always going to default to that, other than quarterback. We all understand quarterback comes first, but then it's offensive line, it's defensive line, and then it sort of trickles down, and then running back's pretty low on that list, along with, I would say, off-ball linebacker on the defensive side. Do you think people in the NFL get too slavish to that positional value, Blake? And what I mean by that is there's a certain amount of blue chip players, and Bijan's probably a blue chip player. And even though it's a position that normally you shouldn't look at, should people be more open-minded, I guess is what I'm saying.
I think so. And I think when you're a team like the Eagles and you maybe have the luxury of creating another blue chip type player, like you're saying, on your roster, why not? You have that luxury. You're not trying to build up everything. They did a very good job of last year's draft, drafting the big defensive lineman out of Georgia, replacing Javon Hargrave, letting him leave in free agency for a big contract. They let TJ Edwards leave in free agency when the Kobe Dean taking his spot. That's how you develop and build a team over the long term. And Howie and his staff have done an excellent job of that, of foreseeing the future and doing that. They lose the running back in free agency. Now they can go out and get a rookie in Bijan Robinson to replace that, because they have the luxury of having a really good team around him and another pick later in that same round.
All right. Is there, for your ratings, an offensive lineman that jumps out at that top 10 potential position? That's where the Eagles are right now at number 10. John just correctly stated, when in doubt, get into the trenches. That's been the Eagles' way of doing things. And they did lose an offensive lineman this year via free agency. They believe they've got its replacement. The guy they drafted in the second round came Jerkins last year. But just in case, now you need more depth and a pick where you're going to take him and not push him year one, but eventually something's going to open up, like a Jason Kelsey retirement. Is there an offensive lineman that's a top 10 talent in your mind this year?
I don't see that player. There are safe picks. There's going to be starters in the league from these first round offensive linemen, but no upper tier players to create that value over maybe a blue chip type player, maybe even a pass rusher or a defensive lineman that you think could play significant snaps in year one. This has become a league now where those first rounders have to come in and play. And I don't care what team you're on, whether you're on the Chiefs, the Eagles, or one of the lower tier teams, you've got to come in and play and have some significant success early on, especially if you're going to be taken in that top 10, top 15 range. I think they're going to be offensive linemen taken in that top 10 range just because they're safe. A few years ago, we selected Jack Conklin, who was a very good player out of Michigan State, who's been a very good pro. But when his fifth-year option came open and the price tag on that fifth-year option was so high for a right tackle, the value didn't meet the pick. And what ends up happening with that situation is you have to let him leave after 4 years instead of 5. And that's a significant drop-off when you're talking about taking a good player. And he went on to the Browns for a big free agent contract. But if you can't afford that fifth-year contract on an offensive lineman, that's not the left tackle premium position, then you got to let him leave. And I think that's tough. So you're drafting a player that's probably not a premium in that top 10, and you're going to pay for it in that fifth year.
Blake, I want to talk about the calendar with you. We're March 31st, so we're 27 days away. Take us into a building. Where are you at this point And how drastically can things change for you at this point? Can they drastically change for you at this point?
So when you go through the scouting season, the fall and basically part of the All-Star game are scout heavy, GM heavy, personnel director, scouts. Then the coaches get into the evaluation. That's where it changes. Okay. They've been evaluating their team all year. They self-scout their team. Now they're part of the draft process, starting with the All-Star games, definitely the combine, and then through pro days. That's where the board starts to change a little bit. When position coaches start to evaluate players, head coaches, coordinators. Now you're going to have some movement, and you're going to have movement based on maybe this player that we really liked in the fall, the scouts really loved. His personality just doesn't fit the room. Maybe we've changed GMs and head coaches, like the Arizona Cardinals changed GM head coaches. Now that's totally thrown out the window. We've got a brand new board starting with the new GM. That does change some things. But right now, there should just be incremental changes. Maybe if you have a group of second-round players, maybe somebody goes to the top that was at the bottom, but they shouldn't jump rounds. That's where you make mistakes. That's where players are brought up on the draft board too much because of maybe a personality trait, fast 40, what have you. Some of this, I can develop a player, comes into play and they get jumped up. So those things happen, and then they start to settle down a little bit as the calendar goes to the draft in those last 2 weeks. Now you have the meeting of the scouts and the coaches, and they have to agree.
Let me bring in another factor, and if it's not that big a factor, please tell me, but I would think it would be. Medicals. Where does that factor in? Is that on the scouting level? Is it on the general manager level? You're going to get medicals on a player. You're going to have your medical guys evaluate them and look at the MRIs and the CAT scan and everything else. When does that get factored in? On what level, and how big a factor does it play?
So once the medical information is given to our doctors and our trainers, they start to put that in the books right off the bat. Put it in the report of the player. And as a director, I would always see that. And the worst thing that can happen is the medical stuff, because you're not getting good reports. You're only getting bad reports. So it's the worst thing to happen for a scout. You see a player that you love, really fits your team, you built a relationship with, he fits, and the doctors just crushed him, just put a medical reject on him, and you hate that part of it. But it is a necessary part of the puzzle that you're trying to come up with, and they have their job. And I think when you keep it separate, let them do their job, let the police, FBI, the off the field stuff do their part. We do our part as football people. Coaches do their part as the coaches. That's when you work together. But it's a very important part, Jody, like you mentioned. It's the worst day for a scout and coach because you're only going to get players taken off the board. But it does start to make the board clearer because those players are taken off or dropped around because of the value is now lost.
Blake, you mentioned Bryce Young. We talked about him. There's some size issues there. I look at the kid from Pitt who I love. There's some size issues there. Kalijah Cansey, the defensive tackle. A couple of years ago, Micah Parsons. A lot of people are saying, well, he's got to be an all-ball linebacker because his arms weren't long enough, and he's one of the best edge rushers in football. Do you think the success of the Aaron Donalds, the Micah Parsons, the Kyler Murrays of the world, you've been doing this for a long time. Have things changed? Are people more willing to look at guys who don't meet the traditional measurements for success at a particular position?
Absolutely. And it's because of success. We have to learn through other people sometimes, like you mentioned, an Aaron Donald. When I went to Pitt and I watched Aaron Donald, first thing I did was go out to practice, and I was like, wow, he is small. Then I turn on film and go, no one's blocked him yet. I can't see a guy blocking him. And they'll double team him, and he'll split the double team, and he runs as well as a linebacker. And you start to see different traits that overcome the lack of size. And that's what I'm looking for. What are the traits that overcome some of your lack of physical size or our athleticism? There's a lot of players today, the Tyrone Matthews, the Aaron Donalds, even Jason Kelsey, for example. Not the size you want from a heaviness. Kevin Mawai was like that. We had Kevin Mawai, and he was struggling to get to 280, 285. But you know what he was? He was super smart, very savvy, tough, mean, great hands, great feet, great movement skills. Same thing Kelsey has. What makes him a great player and a future Hall of Famer. Those things are a little bit different. They're outliers because they have special traits that overcome that lack of size. And there's so many of them when even the Jalen Waddles and the Tyreek Hills, that outstanding quickness, run vision after the catch, speed, burst, acceleration overcomes maybe the lack of height, length, speed that you're always looking for. So yes, I think the league has adapted and evolved with some of the smaller players.
Blake, I'm going to make a general definition statement here and need you to react to it. Football has become, sports just in general, but football as much as any other, has become an analytical game that people need to have a number that they can sink their teeth into if they're going to understand something. And I'm sure that's the case with scouting as well. Which number would mean more to you with a guy, I don't know, say a defensive tackle? Number of tackles or what he runs the 40 in? That you've got the data of the combine and the data of the season. How do you balance those two things if you're a data-driven scout?
I'm going to answer this a couple of different ways, but it's a great question because I go with production. I go with production, but scouting, in my opinion, is a series of questions you ask yourself. Why does a player make a play? Why doesn't he? Who is he playing against? Different questions you ask yourself of, if a defensive lineman, for example, has 8 tackles in a game, 4 behind the line of scrimmage, who's he playing against? How did he make those tackles? What did he use to have success? Is that success what he used, technique wise, fundamental wise, pass rush wise? Is it going to work on the next level? Those things I think you ask yourself. So to answer yourself, I would look at production first, but not production just in the number of tackles or sacks. I love pressures and hurries and, things that move players off their spot on the other side. If you're a player that can create havoc and you have other players to clean up sacks or tackles, you're a productive player. Just because you didn't make the tackle, you're still productive. So those different things I love to see, but I would definitely look at production over tackles any day. But I look at that and I'm going to have to contradict myself. I remember when Richard Seymour and Marcus Stroud came out of Georgia. Okay, 2 great players side by side. I think Richard Seymour had a sack and a half, and Marcus Stroud had 2 in their last year. They both went into the league and had outstanding careers. Obviously, Richard Seymour elevated. So you have to look at the why. Why weren't they making plays? They were playing in a scheme where they were 2 gappers instead of up the field penetrators. And you saw the ability. That's why both of them went in the first round.
Yeah. And make sure you follow Blake on Twitter at Blake Bed, Bedd. You can read him, beddingfieldsports.com. We mentioned Jordan Davis a little bit earlier because he was the 13th pick in the draft last year. Blake, the Eagles traded up, targeted trade up to get him. He's not a stat guy. I mean, I said day one, Jody can tell you, people are expecting sacks, and that's not him. He's the guy who ties up people and lets Nakobe Dean run to the football and make plays. When you pick that high in the draft, I call it esoteric. A lot of fans aren't going to see his impact on the game if everything works out. That doesn't matter to a team, right? They don't care. As long as he's helping you win, they don't care about stats.
Correct. And you start to look at the players around him, and, they did a great job with Hassan Reddick. And, this year, like you're talking about Nakobe Dean Dean's going to be the stat guy. He's the one that's going to clean up everything on the inside. And a lot of it's going to be because Jordan Davis is tying up 2 blockers. He will flash that penetration and reroute a running back, changes angle on the run play, maybe get the quarterback off his spot a couple of times just because of his size, length, and ability to take a gap at times. So he has that ability to play 3 downs, but you're right. He's never going to be a double-digit sack guy. He's not going to be an impact player from that standpoint, but he's going to be an important piece if he continues to learn and develop his game because he's got it. He's got the size, he's got the raw strength, and he's got some up-the-field penetration skills, but other players are going to benefit from him being on the field.
All right, Blake, last one for me. And again, thanks for jumping in with us today. it's draft day and you've got all your rankings and your board and your scouts and the guys that you specifically saw, whatever, and the draft is going along and you're having a good day or you're having a bad day, whichever one it is. And there's a team that takes a player and it doesn't come close to matching up with where you guys had them ranked or what you thought on the player, where you go, yeah, good luck with that. They got no idea what they're doing. Or you go, oh, spit. They took him that high because their reputation was that good that maybe you think you might have missed it. What was the team, not individual, but what was the team that you would say, all right, I know, good luck on that? Or the team you said, who are those two teams that, because of your experience, that many drafts you sat in on, that you said, if they think this, maybe I should be thinking it, or if they think this, no, I'll stay with what I originally thought.
I'll say this for years, and it was one of our biggest rivals, but if the Ravens took somebody under Ozzie Newsome that we didn't have as high, I started to go, what are we missing here? Because they had a lot of they had a lot of success in the draft, and they had a really nice job, that really good staff to develop players as well. Because you're like, ooh, I hope we didn't miss on this one, because not only are they the Ravens and one of our biggest rivals, but they have success in that draft. And there were some other teams where I would sit there and say probably we're talking about early 2000s where maybe the Bengals took somebody a little high and I wasn't as worried. I just wasn't as worried at that point. They were heavy on Power 5 teams. They weren't going to select smaller school guys, but they weren't as much of a concern at that point, just because. But now they are. Now they develop and draft well.
And by the way, Duke Tobin, I mean, he's got like 5 scouts, Blake. That's part of it. I mean, the Eagles, they're like 25 deep in their personnel department. Duke Tobin does an amazing job.
I've known Duke for 30 years, and Duke is an outstanding scout. And what he's really done a good job of is roster construction. And I think that's early on in the Bengals. They always had good players. Corey Dillon, they had Carl Pickens, they had great players. They just didn't develop a roster. Now he's developing a roster, and he's not satisfied anymore. Took Jonah Williams in the first round, left tackle, didn't work out. We're going to go sign Orlando Brown. Let's go do that. Duke is a very good GM, and you're seeing the success the Bengals are having because of it.
Last one for me. We know the quarterbacks are going to go high in this draft. You said that you had 2 QBs that will probably go in the first round that you wouldn't even have a first round draft pick, draft grade on. Are either of the two at the top, Joe Burrow or Herbert or Jalen Hurts, who's played himself into that conversation for sure this year? 3 years from now, we're going to be talking about either one of these guys as a guy who's going to be getting a $50 million contract?
I think Bryce Young is that player. All these players need talent around them. And I think when you have success, like Joe Burrow, for example, let's second year, bring in Jamar Chase, bring his teammate, bring an outstanding playmaker with him. They all need that. And they can't develop if they don't have players around them. But Bryce Young has that potential, I think, to be just an outstanding NFL quarterback. He has unique skill set outside of the physical limitations of accuracy, intelligence. Field vision is rare and outstanding. I like him to Drew Brees. I think that's who he is. And I think he's going to be a very good pro.
Hey, Blake, I can't believe, sorry, trying to keep you on too long, but
no, you're fine.
AJ Brown. I forgot to ask you about AJ because you have connections in Tennessee. I mean, that guy is unbelievable. I saw him. I knew he was good, but I saw him and I'm like, I didn't know he was this good. Why wouldn't the Titans say, hey, we got to pay this guy?
That was a huge mistake, and it cost the GM his job. And that's that's a mistake you can't make. You got 3 years out of a player that had a 4-year contract, could have had a 5th year with a franchise tag that would have been, definitely easy to pay for the production that he gives. And your window to have success was a 2 to 3 year window. Because of that trade, their window is diminished. Now they have an older Ryan Tannehill, now they have an older Derrick Henry, and Philadelphia's window is just now opening up with a lot of the young players. But A.J. Brown is strong. He's tough. He makes the tough catches. He wants to play in big games. He had some hamstrings and things in Tennessee, but the production was still there, and an outstanding player. And he's a gamer. And he brings some intensity to a team that the Tennessee always liked, but now bringing it to Philadelphia. that was an outstanding trade for Howie, and got a player that steps right in with Devontae Smith, and Jalen Hurts needed that extra player. You have to give the hats off to the Eagles GM because he made an outstanding trade there. But the Titans suffered for it. One guy lost his job for it, and now they're probably in kind of a soft rebuild.
Yeah, we've kind of put the check mark in the Eagles column for that one already. Yeah, when you're in it, don't think the results are going to be changing anytime soon. Yep. Check out his website, beddingfieldsports.com. Blake, we appreciate you jumping in and giving us as much time as you did today. We'll probably try and get you on again before the draft takes place. Thanks for doing it with us this afternoon.
My pleasure, gentlemen.
Thank you, Blake.
Our pleasure. Blake Beddingfield, executive in the NFL.
I forgot AJ. Glad I snuck that in.
Yeah. That I called out a W for Howie from last year. That's a big time W for Howie. All right, Johnny Mac coming back. You know what we got to do? Put a bow on the show here on Birds 365.